On December 22, 1956, two young men, 24 and 22 years old, boarded the Aiguille du Midi cable car out of Chamonix toward the summit of Mont Blanc. They had 12 days to live. They would spend the final week of it dying in full view of an entire town. In the village square, tourists watched them through telescopes. They did not die from a fall. They did not die from an avalanche. They died inside the wreck of the helicopter that was sent to save them, carried up by the same machine anyone can ride this afternoon. Camera in one hand, coffee in the other. Mont Blanc has killed more people than Everest, K2, and Annapurna combined, several times over. On this mountain, those two deaths were not a tragedy. They were the schedule. Mont Blanc is the highest mountain in Western Europe, 4,809 meters. It is also, by every serious accounting, the deadliest mountain on Earth. Not the deadliest in the Alps, not the deadliest in Europe. On Earth. How many people have died on Mont Blanc? Historians and rescue services put the total between 6,000 and 8,000 dead since climbing began here in 1786. Now hold that against the mountains your brain files under deadly. Everest. Roughly 340 dead in a century of expeditions. K2, the mountain that kills one climber for every 4 who summit, around 100. Annapurna, statistically the most lethal 8,000-meter peak per attempt, around 70. Add them together, and you have one small fraction of Mont Blanc's ledger. Per attempt, your odds here are better than on K2, which is precisely the sentence that gets people killed. The mountain with the gift shop has outkilled the entire Himalayan death zone, and it did most of it within sight of hotel balconies. Run the arithmetic on 6,000 deaths across 240 years, and it settles into a rhythm, one body every 12 days without interruption since before the French Revolution. Local authorities have counted as many as 100 deaths across the massif in a single season, which means that in a bad July, this mountain kills more people in a month than K2 has killed in some entire decades. The Chamonix Mountain Rescue Unit, the PGHM, flies more than 1,000 missions a year out of one valley, against one mountain. During peak weeks, they have logged a dozen interventions in a single day. There are hospital emergency departments in mid-sized cities with slower intake. And here is the number that makes all the other numbers incomprehensible. 20,000 people attempt the summit every season, and the Chamonix Valley absorbs millions more, and 500,000 of them ride a cable car to 3,842 meters to drink coffee above the clouds. The overwhelming majority go home with photographs. The brochures are not lying to them. That is the disturbing part. Every image is real. The terrace, the summit snow like meringue, the paragliders drifting past the ice. The mountain simply understands something the visitors do not. The postcard is the trap. Illusion number 1, the machinery. In 1955, engineers completed the Aiguille du Midi cable car, at the time, the highest in the world. It lifts you from the streets of Chamonix to 3,842 meters in 20 minutes. Vertical gain, 2,800 meters. That is the height of 7.5 Empire State Buildings, stacked, climbed in the time it takes to drink a coffee. At the top, there is a gift shop, a restaurant, a glass box you can stand in for photographs. There are also 37% fewer oxygen molecules in every breath you take. Mountaineers spend days acclimatizing to that altitude. The cable car delivers pensioners into it in the time between 2 heartbeats of a normal morning. Every year, some of them collapse before they reach the terrace. This is not a figure of speech. PGHM rescue logs treat it as routine. Visitors in street shoes, unconscious on the viewing terrace at 3,842 meters, evacuated by the same helicopters that work the summit routes. Some in cardiac distress within an hour of leaving a valley cafe. They came for the view. The helicopter came for them. The infrastructure whispers a single message. This has been handled. Nothing here has been handled. It has only been paved. And remember the 2 young men from the opening. In December 1956, 1 year after this machine opened, it carried them up too. The mountain's most modern convenience delivered them to it. Illusion number 2, the walk. The standard route to the summit, the Goûter route, is graded PD, Peu difficile. In the guidebook grading system, it sits near the bottom. There are no ropes fixed up vertical ice, no technical rock. It is, on paper, a very long uphill walk, which is why accountants, students, and fathers on 50th birthday trips attempt it in numbers no other 4,000-meter peak on the planet sees. The grade measures technique. It does not measure the 50 meters of that route we will come to shortly. A stretch rescue pilots do not grade at all. They just have a name for it. Number 3. The weather in the valley. Chamonix in July averages 25 degrees Celsius. The summit, 3 vertical kilometers above the ice cream stands, averages -2 in the same month, and that is the average, not the storm. When weather systems collide with the massif, the summit zone produces winds above 150 kilometers per hour and effective temperatures below -30 in July. The deadly detail is the transition time. Conditions on the upper mountain can go from postcard to unsurvivable in under 3 hours. Faster than a slow climber can descend to the nearest refuge. The valley teaches you the mountain's mood. The valley is lying. This is where the mountain begins to kill. Before the storms, before the cold, there is one 50-meter stretch of the tourist route that has its own casualty ledger. Helicopter crews call it a corridor. Not a corridor to somewhere. A corridor with a toll booth. Stay with me. The Goutte route crosses a gully at 3,300 meters called the Grand Couloir. Search for the Grand Couloir of the Goutte, and you will find climbers calling it by its other name, the Corridor of Death, and rescue statistics that read like a war report. Rescue service data compiled by researchers at the Université Savoie Mont Blanc documented at least 102 deaths and over 230 serious injuries on this single route between 1990 and 2017. One route. On a not very difficult mountain. Averaged out, the corridor and the ridge above it produce a death roughly every 100 days. The crossing itself is about 50 meters wide, 30 to 90 seconds of walking. There is a steel cable to clip into, which protects against slipping. It protects against nothing else, because the threat does not come from below. Above the crossing hangs several hundred meters of shattered rock face, and that face sheds. Understand what a falling stone becomes over that drop. A rock the size of your fist, released a few hundred meters up, arrives at the trail carrying the energy of a sledgehammer swung two-handed at full force, concentrated into a striking surface the width of 2 fingers. A climbing helmet is engineered to protect against dropped carabiners and glancing impacts. Against the couloir, it is a formality. Researchers who installed monitoring equipment at the crossing recorded rockfall events on a majority of summer days. On the worst days, a discharge every few minutes. The gully is a shooting gallery where the trigger is temperature, because that is the mechanism, heat, on a mountain famous for cold. The rock faces above the couloir are held together by permafrost, ice inside the fractures, acting as mortar. Every afternoon the sun softens that mortar, and the wall lets go of pieces of itself. For a century, the official understanding was simple and confident: cross at dawn while the mortar is frozen and you are safe. Then geomorphologists, among them Ludovic Ravenel's team at the Editum Laboratory in Chambéry, who have been drilling and instrumenting this massif for 2 decades, published the correction. The permafrost is degrading at depth, not just at the surface. By 2019, the conclusion was in print. The wall now releases rock in the morning, at night, in October. The safe hour still appears in older guidebooks. The mountain stopped honoring it. On this mountain's recommended alternative route, a legend was about to test that science. The heat has escalated since. In the record summer of 2022, conditions above 3,000 meters became so unstable that guides suspended ascents and the route effectively shut down in peak season. That July, the mayor of Saint-Gervais, the town the Goutte route starts from, made an announcement that went around the world. Climbers insisting on attempting the route in those conditions should first deposit 15,000 euros, and the couloir is only the doorman. Mont Blanc's other standard route, the Trois Monts, out of that same cable car station, climbs beneath the hanging séracs of Mont Blanc du Tacoul and then onto the slopes of Mont Maudit, the cursed mountain. On July 12, 2012, at 5 in the morning, ropes of climbers were moving up Mont Maudit in the dark from the Refuge des Cosmiques, the correct start time, the disciplined alpine start, when an avalanche released high on the slope above them and swept the face. 9 climbers died. Among them was Roger Payne, 55 years old, a British mountain guide of international reputation, former General Secretary of the British Mountaineering Council, a man with 3 decades of Himalayan and alpine experience. He was roped up, correctly equipped, on the correct line, at the correct hour, doing everything the guidebooks prescribe. The avalanche did not consult his resume. On this mountain, the difference between a legend and a beginner can be one slope loading overnight and letting go at 5 a.m., and it happened on the recommended alternative to the corridor of death. Above 4,000 meters, the weapons change again. The body's core runs at 37 degrees Celsius. At 35, shivering becomes violent and fine motor control degrades. You can no longer work a zipper, a buckle, a stove. At 33, the brain begins editing reality, confusion, apathy, a strange contentment. Below 30, the heart's rhythm becomes unstable, and any rough movement, including the movements of the people trying to rescue you, can stop it. Cold does not feel like an attack, it feels like permission to rest. Now put a person at 4,300 meters, in wind, at night, with 55% of the oxygen their brain calibrated its judgment on. Hypoxia and hypothermia degrade the same thing first: decision-making. The mountain's true mechanism is not rockfall, not avalanches, not frostbite. It is that every one of its weapons disarms the victim's ability to recognize the weapon. In 1956, that mechanism was given 2 names and a national audience. If the mechanism is this well understood, the thresholds, the temperatures, the corridor, the snow, then the prepared should live. Roger Payne's file says otherwise. The case we opened this video with says worse. Everything you just learned should function as armor. In December 1956, 2 fit, equipped, competent young men had most of it, and all of France watched through telescopes as it failed them, one waypoint at a time. Jean Vincendon is 24, French, a strong alpinist with serious roots behind him. François-Henri is 22, Belgian, equally committed. Their objective is the Brenva Spur, a classic difficult line on the Italian flank in winter, which in 1956 is the frontier of ambition. This is not recklessness by the standards of their era. It is the sport. December 22nd, 1956. Departure. The cable car, 1 year old, the highest in the world, the pride of the valley, lifts them out of Chamonix. The red trail begins at the top station. Waypoint 1, the Fourche Bivouac Hut, a metal box bolted to a ridge above 3,600 meters. Here, the 2 young men encounter another rope team with the same ambition: Walter Bonatti, already the most famous climber alive, and Silvano Gazer. The parties agree to move together. For a few hours, Vincendon and Henry are climbing with the best mountaineer of the century. It is the safest they will ever be. Waypoint 2, the Brenva Face, December 25th. The weather breaks, not gradually, the way this massif does it, a wall of cloud and wind arriving in hours. High on the route, retreat downward is no longer possible. The only way off is up and over, into the storm. The 2 ropes reach the upper slopes together, exhausted, in wind that removes the world. Waypoint 3, the Divergence, roughly 4,300 meters. This is the moment the case turns. Bonatti, reading the storm, angles his rope toward the Italian side, a longer unglamorous descent toward the Gonella refuge. Vincendon and Henry turn the other way, toward the French side and the Valo emergency shelter at 4,362 meters. On the map, their choice is shorter. Bonatti and Gazer stagger into shelter and survive, Gazer paying with fingers and toes to frostbite. He is the contrast case, the man who lived, marked for life by the same night. Vincendon and Henry never reach the Valo. What happened next is reconstructed from what the telescopes saw and what the rescuers found, because neither man survived to describe it. Somewhere in the whiteout, exhausted, they lose the line. They bivouac in the open, above 4,000 meters. One night, which a strong body can survive, then another, which begins the arithmetic of core temperature you already know. They drift downward onto the Grand Plateau, a vast snow terrace at 4,000 meters, fully visible from the valley. Waypoint 4, last seen. Except here, the phrase inverts and becomes the cruelest detail in this file. They are not last seen. They are continuously seen. From December 27th, telescopes in Chamonix track 2 dark commas on the White Plateau. Tourists take turns at the telescopes. Newspapers print daily updates. 2 men are freezing to death in plain sight of a town with hotels, cinemas, and a railway station. And a 3-kilometer wall of winter air makes them as unreachable as the moon. The rescue attempts are a chronicle of 1956's limits. Guides who try on foot are beaten back. Aircraft drop supply parcels, and this time, the drops land. The parcels reach the 2 men, and there they sit, intact, because Vincendon's and Henry's fingers are so destroyed by frostbite that they can no longer untie a piece of string. The food is in their hands. The hands no longer work. The mountain had already confiscated the tools they needed to accept help. Then, December 31st, a military Sikorsky helicopter, flying at the ragged edge of its altitude ceiling, attempts a landing on the plateau and crashes. The crew survives the impact. Rescuers who reach the site now face arithmetic instead of heroism. The weather is closing, the daylight is dying, and the two climbers, frostbitten, semi-conscious, beyond walking, cannot be carried down in time. The rescuers place Vincendon and Henry inside the fuselage of the crashed helicopter, out of the wind, and descend with a promise to return. The weather does not permit a return. Overflights in the days that follow report no signs of life. The two men die in the first days of January, inside the machine that was sent to save them. The wreck sits on the plateau all winter, visible from the valley floor, a tomb with rotor blades. The bodies are recovered in March 1957. And the recovery team's report contains the detail this case is remembered for inside rescue circles, in lowered voices. Vincendon lay inside the fuselage, where the rescuers had left him. Henry did not. Henry was found draped across the helicopter's low doorway, torso in, legs outside the machine. He had been trying to climb out, which means that at some point, after the rescuers descended, after the overflights, one of the two men was still moving. The final overflight that reported no signs of life may have flown over a living man. France erupts. The scandal of the uncoordinated rescue leads directly to the creation of the PGHM in 1958, the professional mountain rescue service that has since saved tens of thousands. The modern machinery of alpine rescue is, in a documented and traceable sense, built on those two deaths, which leaves the question the file cannot close on its own. At the divergence point, Bonatti turned one way and lived. Two strong, informed young men turned the other way and died. Why did they choose it? Because the mountain was never the killer. The killer rode up with them. The mechanism has a name now: planned continuation bias, the documented tendency, studied intensively in aviation accident research, to keep executing an original plan as conditions collapse, because the plan is the last familiar object in a disintegrating situation. Vincendon and Henry aimed for the valo because the valo was the plan, the French side, the known descent, home. Bonatti abandoned the plan and improvised toward the unfamiliar. Abandoning the plan is precisely what a cold, hypoxic brain is least equipped to do. The storm didn't need to beat them, it only needed to make them predictable. And before you file that under 1956, the same mechanism walks through the Grand Couloir every single morning. Climbers arrive at the crossing, hear rock moving above, and cross anyway, because the refuge is booked, the weather window is Tuesday, the flight home is Saturday, and 40 people ahead of them just crossed without dying. Social proof plus a sunk plan at 3,300 meters. A study commissioned by the Petzl Foundation put observers and cameras on the crossing itself and recorded what climbers actually do there. Most of those who watched rock come down the couloir crossed it anyway, minutes later. Read that again. They watched the corridor fire and stepped into it on schedule. You would have too. That is the reframe this file forces. Every person watching this has driven the last hour of a long trip exhausted because the hotel was already booked. The plan continues. It is the most human software there is, and this mountain has been executing against it since 1786. Psychologists did not formally name and measure this class of bias until the 1970s. Mont Blanc had been exploiting it for 2 centuries before it had a name. On December 31st, with night falling and 2 men who could not walk, would you have stayed on the plateau to die beside them, or left them in the wreck and promised to return? The brain is the weapon. The mountain only supplies the terrain. But there is one thing this mountain does that no other mountain on Earth does, and almost nobody outside the Chamonix Valley knows it. Nothing is ever lost on Mont Blanc. It is only in transit. Something is coming down the mountain right now. It left the summit before you were born. It has been moving every single day since, and in a moment you will know exactly what it is, and where it surfaces. Why the 2 young men made their choice, you now know. The plan chose for them. And the thing nobody knows closes here, on a river of ice called the Glacier des Bossons. The Bossons falls from just below the summit to 1,400 meters, one of the greatest vertical drops of any glacier in the Alps, ending within sight of the valley road. And a glacier is not a landscape, it is a conveyor belt. Whatever falls in near the top travels inside the ice, downhill, a few dozen centimeters a day, roughly 1 footstep every day for 50 years, until the melting snout delivers it back at the bottom. The mountain runs a postal service with a half-century delivery window. Twice, it accepted cargo at scale. On November 3, 1950, Air India Flight 245, the Malabar Princess, struck the mountain near a spur called the Rocher de la Tournette. 48 dead. 16 years later, on January 24, 1966, Air India Flight 101, the Kanchenjunga, hit the mountain. 117 dead, including Homi Bhabha, the father of India's nuclear program. 2 aircraft 16 years apart from the same airline, destroyed against essentially the same rock. Both wrecks fed into the ice above the Beau Zone, and the deliveries have been arriving ever since. In 2012, a jute diplomatic mail bag stamped with Indian government markings melted out of the glacier. In 2013, a climber found a corroded metal box packed with emeralds, sapphires, and rubies in pouches marked Made in India, appraised at over 150,000 euros. French law let him keep half 8 years later when no heir claimed it. In 2017, human remains from the 1966 crash surfaced, 51 years after impact. And in 2020, a cafe owner near the glacier's snout pulled a bundle of Indian newspapers out of the ice. Still legible, still readable, front page carrying the election of Indira Gandhi, the news that aircraft was carrying on the day it hit the mountain. The headline finished its journey. The passengers never did. A man named Daniel Roche has spent decades walking that ice, cataloging what comes down, so that what surfaces gets a name instead of a shrug. Stand at the bottom of the Beau Zone and understand what you are actually looking at. Not scenery, an open case file, 3,400 vertical meters tall, processing evidence at 1 footstep per day. And from those 2 flights alone, it swallowed the remains of more than 160 people, most of whom it has still not finished returning. The people in the ice were passengers. They never chose the mountain at all. It chose them out of the sky, and it is still handing them back on its own schedule. Nothing is ever lost on Mont Blanc. It is only in transit. So the next time a machine offers to lift you above 4,000 meters in the time it takes to finish a coffee, remember that this mountain honors every ticket, keeps everything it is given, and decides alone when to give it back. That includes whatever you bring it. Because here is the part that should follow you out. Mont Blanc returns what it takes. Slowly, coldly, but it returns it. There is another place where this exact pattern repeats. Except there, the corridor sits at 8,200 meters. No helicopter has ever hovered above it. And in the winter of 2021, the whole world watched 3 men walk into it and waited months for the mountain to answer. It never really did. That place is next.